There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
Good morning, good listeners. This is What in the World is Going On. I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. A word from our sponsor, Lincoln Log Homes, Kannapolis, North Carolina. Did you know that we can sell you a log home kit for 1,000 square foot for under $13,000? We've cut everything from well houses to a strip mall. We can cut anything there or in between. Be happy to give you a quote on it. If you're local in the Ford broadcasting area or on YouTube, either way, contact me personally at Lincoln Log Homes. 2 telephone numbers if you're local, 704-932-6151. If it's long distance, toll free 800-848-3310. Call anytime, 24/7. Leave a message. Give me your name, telephone number, and a good place to call, and I'll work with you personally. But one added thing, mention this program when you call in. You see, if you mention this program, you'll get the best price there is out there from us. Lincoln Log Homes, starting in 1974, members of the Charlotte Better Business Bureau. Now to our program. Let's take a look at the General Flynn situation. Joe DeGenova said on Newsmax 10 TV, General Flynn was framed. Speaking on the Greg Kelly reports on Newsmax TV, Joe DeGenova, he's a former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, levels strong blasts at former FBI Director James Comey, former FBI agent Peter Strzok, and Sally Yates, former Deputy Attorney General in the Obama administration. He levied these charges against them for framing and persecuting General Michael Flynn for political purposes. There's no doubt about it that General Flynn was framed. DeGenova told this to Kelly, and I'm quoting DeGenova now. They threw the law out. They threw the Constitution out because they hated Trump. They hated him so much, and they were using General Flynn as a wedge to hurt the president. End quote. During the FBI's investigation into General Flynn, an FBI agent wrote, quote, "What's our goal? Truth? Admission? Or get him to admit to a lie so that we can prosecute him and get him fired?" This a report from The Hill. If we're seen as playing games, the White House will be furious, they said. Protect our institution, the FBI, by not playing games. The memo appears to give support to the belief that General Flynn was targeted by anti-Trump leftovers from the Obama administration. DeGenova told Kelly, and I'm quoting, if there was ever a case where someone had a right to sue for constitutional damages, both compensatory and punitive, it's General Flynn. And I hope he does it, and I believe he will. I assume he's going to be exonerated. End quote. Strzok was fired from the FBI anti-Trump text between him and his lover, FBI attorney Lisa Page. These became public, and he lost his job. DeGenova said, I know this president will pardon General Flynn, but Flynn shouldn't have to get a pardon. He should have this case against him dismissed by the court. And if not by the court, Attorney General Barr should dismiss the case out of hand. A quote from DeGenova. It's an easy call for the Attorney General. And I would say that Trump ought to put pressure on Barr if Barr even hesitates to do this. That's from me, folks. DeGenova added, quote, General Flynn did nothing wrong. Every step the FBI took was Strzok with Comey. It was all designed to trap him, to lie about him, to corrupt the legal process. Every one of those FBI people and DOJ people who were involved in this attempt to take down Flynn should be indicted. End quote. Same subject. Another report. The Flynn entrapment was McCabe's revenge. Key to the ambush interview of General Michael Flynn that set him up for prosecution and persecution on made-up charges by James Comey's FBI was the advice given to Flynn by Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. Relax, you don't need a lawyer. Flynn had to be caught off guard and without legal counsel for the entrapment plan to work. Well, they set it up good, folks. Former FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who arranged the Bureau's interview with the then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn at the White House on January 24, 2017. The interview that ultimately led to Flynn's guilty plea on one count of making false statements suggested Flynn not have a lawyer present at the session. This according to newly filed documents just released this past week. We know that Swamp Thing James Comey's mission in life was to keep Hillary Clinton out of prison and Donald Trump out of the White House. But McCabe had a personal hard feelings toward Flynn, which goes way back. Possibly it originated in Flynn's offer to be a witness in a legal proceeding filed against McCabe some time back. But he had it anyway. Previously reported on June 30th, 2017, Flynn and McCabe had a past that predates the Trump presidency, one that provided ample motivation for the perjury trap that McCabe and James Comey set up after Flynn's illegal unmasking. McCabe had a personal grudge against Flynn. The perjury trap was his revenge. To help cover up, it also appears that multiple 302s were created. As Sarah Carter and John Solomon and Circa News reported, the FBI launched a criminal probe against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn 2 years after the retired Army General roiled the Bureau's leadership by intervening on behalf of a decorated counterterrorism who accused now Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe and other top officials of sexual discrimination. This according to documents and interviews, many of them just recently revealed. McCabe eventually became the Bureau's number 2 executive and emerged as a central player in the FBI's Russia election tampering investigation, putting him in a position to impact the criminal inquiry against Flynn. These 3 FBI employees told Circa they personally witnessed McCabe making disparaging remarks about Flynn before and during the time the retired Army General emerged as a figure in the Russia case. In legal service, that's called motive. We have to factor in as well that McCabe and Flynn came from different ends of the political spectrum. Flynn became a key Trump supporter after accusing Obama of facilitating the rise of ISIS through his politics and inaction. McCabe's a Democrat loyalist whose wife campaigned for state office in Virginia as a Democrat, with heavily Democrat financial supporting. In fact, McCabe's efforts on behalf of his wife became the subject of multiple federal probes. Acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe, a central player in the Russia election case, is the focus of 3 separate federal administrative inquiries. Connect the dots, folks. We have a former Deputy FBI Director, Andrew McCabe, campaigning for his wife, who receives large sums of money from the Democrat Party of political Clinton ally Terry McAuliffe. After Clinton blames Russia for her election loss, Flynn becomes a target of an FBI probe in which his identity is illegally unmasked. He was a character witness on behalf of one of McCabe's accusers. And is all this just the result of McCabe's lust for personal revenge? Could be, folks. Could very well be. Trump says he could bring Flynn back. He could bring him back into his administration. Saw it on television this past week. U.S. President Donald Trump said last Thursday he would consider bringing his fired former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, a key figure in the probe into Russia's interference in the 2016 election, back into his administration. The president's comments, the latest in a string of remarks about Flynn, go beyond prior suggestions by Trump that the retired general would be in line for a presidential pardon. I would certainly consider it. Yeah, I think he's a fine man, Trump told reporters. He didn't specify what role he might give to Flynn, but he said it. I heard him personally. Flynn pleaded guilty to making false statements in a charge brought by then Special Counsel Robert Mueller. He's now insisting he did not lie and wants to get back out of the plea. Internal FBI documents turned over by the Justice Department just this past Wednesday showed FBI officials debated whether and when to warn Flynn that he could face criminal charges as he prepared for a January 17 interview with him in the Russian probe. Trump blamed Flynn's predicament on, quote, dirty cops, said the documents show Flynn was the victim. He's in the process of being exonerated. If you look at those notes from yesterday, Trump said this on last Thursday, that was total exoneration, a quote from President Trump. Flynn left his White House position after only 24 days when he was found to have misled Vice President Pence about his discussion with Russia then Ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. Trump said in 2017 that he fired Flynn because Flynn had lied to Pence and the FBI. It was during a trip to Indiana last Thursday that Flynn's actions may have been unintentional. Pence said this on that trip. I'm deeply troubled by the revelations of what appeared to have been an investigative abuse by officials in the Justice Department, and we're going to continue to look into that very carefully. Again, a quote from Vice President Pence. Pence stated, and I'm quoting again, my respect for General Flynn personally, for his service to the country, is undiminished, and I'm inclined more than ever to believe that what he communicated to me back during the transition leading to our inauguration, it was unintentional and not that he was attempting to misrepresent facts. Again, a quote from Vice President Pence. It's a total fiasco, folks, and it's a total insult. My opinion of many others, General Flynn is a worthy patriot. Now to a change of thought and a change of topics. Let me ask you a question. In a national emergency, does the U.S. Constitution still apply? An essential principle of the United States that it's a free country, with individual liberties guaranteed and government power limited. That concept is now being tested. A deadly worldwide pandemic has led to draconian lockdowns, forced closings of business, and even mandatory stay-at-home orders. Some with Orwellian friendly-sounding names like, quote, safer at home, or, you like this one? Quote, stay home, stay healthy, end quote. But you see, even though they sounded nice, they're still mandatory, in many cases enforced by the police. The unprecedented far-reaching orders have been issued by unelected county health officers, as well as by governors of some of the states. And folks, let me ask you, are these orders legal? Do state governments have the legal and the constitutional authority to forcibly close all, quote, non-essential businesses? To confine the entire population to their homes indefinitely without a trial? Is it constitutionally kosher? And who decides which businesses are non-essential? In California, churches, synagogues, and mosques have been deemed non-essential, ordered closed. But liquor and hardware stores are still open and doing a bustling business. Right here in North Carolina, similar situation. Liquor stores are open. They're essential. Buy a lottery ticket, too. That's essential. And abortions, of course, they would be. But if you attend a church service and you've got 10 or more people, you're breaking the law. Who gave us that law? Who made that a law? Our good Democrat governor, Governor Cooper, of course. Anyway, President Trump proclaimed a national state of emergency under the National Emergency Act back on March 13th of this year. However, nothing in that proclamation closed any businesses. It didn't confine anyone to their homes or infringe on any other constitutional rights or liberties. That and other actions by the federal government merely cleared away certain regulatory roadblocks that could interfere with the government's response to the pandemic. By contrast, the orders issued at the state and local level were dramatically restricting the civil rights of ordinary law-abiding Americans, shutting down all, quote, non-essential businesses, causing at last count 32 million Americans to lose their job, and confirming the vast majority of the nation, confining them to their homes. All of this was accomplished not pursuant to any law specifically authorizing these actions, but rather on the basis of general laws pertaining to emergencies and quarantines. Not only has this crisis given government officials the authoritarian impulse with those that had authoritarian impulses an opportunity to rule by decree, it's exposed the lamentable fact that most Americans tend to willingly obey such orders without even questioning whether they're legally valid. What are the limits of the government power? Do governors really have the authority to issue such sweeping orders controlling the personal lives of each of the millions of citizens living within the borders of their state? To answer that question, it's necessary to first examine the bedrock principle of democracy, that government derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. This principle is enshrined in our Declaration of Independence, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that all are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are institution among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The power that a government may legitimately exercise is only that power that's been conferred on the government by these people. In the United States, that power is delegated to government officials by constitutional and its constitution and the laws. Governors are not kings. They don't rule over people in their states. Rather, they're employees of the state, and they've been given certain executive powers as specified in each state's constitution. These powers are always limited and never absolute. The supreme law of the land of the United States is the federal Constitution, a document so fundamental to our system of governance that to the extent that any law conflicts with it, that law is deemed invalid. The First Amendment to the Constitution states, and I quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." Through the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, this prohibition was made applicable to the state governments. Yet, these stay-at-home orders very clearly and overtly restrict the right of the people to peaceably assemble. And the orders shuttering churches and other houses of worship undeniably infringe on the free exercise of religion. While it's easy for government officials to say that worship can be done remotely or in the privacy of the homes to which individuals are confined, the fact remains that for many religious believers, there's an admonition to come together to worship, and for others, it's imperative to present prayers and offerings in a holy house of worship. Some people, the homeless, for example, they may not have remote electronic access to worship services. In any event, it is not for the government to decide that these religious beliefs are unimportant or that they may be disregarded. And if home improvement stores, banks, supermarkets, and Walmarts are permitted to remain open as long as social distancing measures are practiced, why are churches not allowed to do the same thing? I ask you that. The right to travel has also been recognized as a fundamental individual right guaranteed by the Constitution. The right to travel is a part of the liberty of which the citizen cannot be deprived without due process of law under the Fifth Amendment. And yet, the orders confining the entire population to their homes except for essential activities, like buying liquor or power tools, but definitely not going to church, not even on Easter Sunday. This restricts the right of the people to travel. When individual rights and liberties are impacted by government action, such action is subject to strict security by the courts. The government must establish that there's a compelling state interest and that its actions is the least restrictive means to promote that interest. It seems highly dubious that an indefinite lockdown of the entire population is the least restrictive means to achieve any legitimate objective. It's hard to imagine a more restrictive means than locking everyone up in their homes and shuttering all businesses deemed, quote, non-essential. The state may have the power to quarantine certain individuals who are reasonably suspected of having been exposed to the virus, But in the U.S., only about 0.1% of the population have tested positive. That is hardly reasonable justification for incarcerating the entire population under house arrest without due process of law. The Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution does not mention any exceptions to individual rights and liberties when there's a declared state of emergency. Such an exception, if it existed, would effectively render the rights illusionary, because authoritarian-minded government officials could simply declare an emergency and thereby negate the rights of the people. Indeed, this is historically the way it has been usually done. It is at fearful times like these when our individual rights are most threatened and most in need of being protected and preserved. The U.S. Supreme Court has held that emergency may not create power. The Civil War didn't give Lincoln the authority to have civilians in Indiana tried by military commissions without due process of law. Even during such a chaotic time, when the nation was convulsed in violence and bloodshed, and individual constitutional rights were protected. Those precious rights should be no less protected today, good listeners. No virus can strip Americans of their civil rights. But as this crisis and the government response to it have shown, if we are all not vigilant in protecting our liberties, they will be taken from us. Might we join together and say, not on my watch will that happen. And then let me ask you this. Will Americans let the coronavirus, the panic that we're having, the panic that we're seeing, are we going to let it destroy our personal liberty? The current balance of power in America is unsustainable and will not hold much longer. We just slinked past the 245th anniversary of the shot that was heard around the world. And most Americans were too busy hunkering down and obeying government directives to remember how heavy the price for liberty always is. There's a rumbling right now below our feet. This rumbling and these tremors may well split the earth around us if our elected leadership do not yield to common sense and shared American purpose. This moment in history is opening up before us two different paths, one in which we reclaim for ourselves the truth that all legitimate power begins with individual consent, and another that deviates sharply from our shared past by giving to the state the ultimate authority for determining what rights each one of us may freely call our own. Down the path of freedom, we must take solid steps, good listeners, for the other path promises to swallow us whole. I've got personally no illusion that American liberty is destined to prevail over this new breed of socialism and government by fiat. Life gives us no certainties, only choices and opportunities. If the other side that denies the existence of God while insisting that our historical fate is predetermined, our side has always cherished human freedom precisely because we know how rare it is. History is repeatedly replete with men dominating other men. What has always made America exceptional, and what the other side has long forgotten or ignored, is that ours is a country that chose to end the cycle of domination by empowering the weakest among us to have an equal voice. You see, for 245 years, we've lumbered down this difficult path with eyes wide open and confident in our inherited wisdom that to do otherwise would unleash the cycles of domination, those that we had worked so hard to tame. And while many of us have watched apprehensively for many years, we've seen the encroaching tyranny of the state, disguised under the cloak of the common will or the collective good. It is only now that the advocates camped on the other side of freedom so boldly declare their intention, that intention to rule over us as they will. An awful lot can happen in the space of a month, as we are now reminded. Weeks ago, we were celebrating the most vibrant American economy in nearly a century, and looking forward to putting an exclamation point on that success by re-electing the man who shook the country awake by telling many different truths. From Venezuela to Iran, Hong Kong to the UK, freedom was on the march everywhere. Now the Barack Obamas and the John Kerrys and the Al Gores across all 50 states are smiling with renewed joy that an America dominated by government control of everything and over everyone is all but certain. So sure are they that they've finally broken the American spirit, that they openly talk about our current national incarceration as the blueprint for our permanent subjugation under the guise of a global warming emergency. Joe Biden, lost in mind as he is certain that he's already won the coming election. Everything we've worked for these past few years is slipping away, good listeners. How many of us who never set foot on the battleground or committed to sacrificing ourselves for another can honestly say we understand the price of freedom? How many of us, until this day, could tell you what that price was? How many of us appreciated how quickly our freedom could be taken by executive decree and our tax compliance? If this period of national confinement and economic destruction does not stir in the blood a sense of urgency, never to allow our government to take again with such ease what our ancestors bequeathed to us with such sacrifice, then our blood is already infected with something more deadly than the Chinese virus. If this exercise in government overreach doesn't crystallize why eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, then folks, the battle is over. The war is lost, and all it is left to consider is whether Biden lives long enough to become king. I, for one, believe this pandemic will be remembered as an unexpected jolt to the American consciousness that finally allowed us to pull the emergency brake before we ran out of track. Will we one day look back and realize that the opening salvo between unbridled state control and personal liberty began when President Trump took office? But only the politicians from coast to coast decided to steal for themselves power that was never theirs. They just to make their possession for the real war for America's future to begin. I'm of the firm opinion that a population once exposed to the idea of freedom can never lose entirely that most vital gift from God. Every descendant of a Holocaust survivor, every freedom-loving Pole or Czech who endured Nazism and Stalinism, every starving soul trying to survive in Venezuela today in order to taste freedom, tomorrow knows that nothing can eradicate human liberty, not as long as some voice somewhere can still remind others that God's gift of freedom is theirs by right. Life and liberty go hand in hand. When so many politicians these days seem comfortable with allowing the wolves of tyranny to nibble at the edges of both, there has never been a more important time than to scream back, quote, "Not on my watch. Not on my watch will I let it happen." In closing, I want to just note there are still voices standing up. One of them I just love to hear from is Franklin Graham. He points out his feelings on this. He says that Trump's enemies are using the shutdown to defeat Trump. Amid pushback against Donald Trump and the White House, the Virus Task Force Opening Up America Again plan, evangelical leader Franklin Graham tweeted, "It is another attempt to defame and the defeat of the U.S. president." Me talking, we've seen many of them. We've seen the Mueller report. We've seen the Russia threat. We've tried for impeachment. And now we've got the pandemics. Anyway, Graham tweeted a week ago, and I'm going to quote, "In listening to the president's enemies and liberal media, it seems like they'd like to see this shutdown drag out and further weaken the economy. Not to save lives, but to save that they could continue to use this to defeat Donald Trump in the election. Pray for our president," Graham encourages. "Pray that God will give him wisdom." Trump and the health experts on the task force said there's ample testing for large swaths of the economy to reopen their economies and their economics, while still maintaining safety and social distancing protocols. Similarly, hospitals, supermarkets didn't shut down but remained open during the pandemic that cost nearly 40,000 lives, 32 million unemployed, and costing the global economic trillions. A majority of the worst infected and death totals come from states run by Democrats, including New York, New Jersey, and Michigan. Those are the states with the most virus-related deaths to date. Again, let us all join with Franklin Graham. Let's you and I personally continue to pray for God's intervention. Let's pray for our president and safety. Let's pray for good advisors be around him. Let's get on our knees before our Lord and pray for the preservation of our republic. Goodbye until next week.